Chapter 556, Discriminatory Treatment. A question? This strange radio transceiver is a little interesting. Danitz cleared his throat.
You can ask, but I might not answer.
Danitz thought with both caution and pride.
Hee, you think I'm the kind of adventurer or archaeologist who ends up killing himself because of curiosity?
It took a few seconds for the radio transceiver to produce its clickety-clack again. An illusory piece of white paper was spat out with red words on it.
Do you have a secret crush on your captain?
No, don't speak nonsense. Who told you that?
Donitz's face instantly reddened. He felt at a loss to have the secret that had been buried deep in his heart for so many years revealed so suddenly. He was embarrassed and ashamed at the same time, and subconsciously wanted to deny it. But at the same time, he was also shocked and confused as to how this matter had been discovered by an outsider. He had never told anyone, and he had kept this secret very well hidden. Danitz opened his mouth, forced a smile, and said,
What a silly question. I refuse to answer.
The radio transceiver produced its clickety-clack and spat out more white paper.
Then let's change the question. Schatz, Meme Bass, if you really don't like her, who can endure such dry and boring lessons? Isn't that right?
Danitz blurted out, his expression twisted.
No, it's because I'm not strong enough to beat her.
The clacking of the radio transceiver became increasingly brisker, and the words on the illusory white paper increased.
A Selin, Point Ellen, Ahui Nacher, A Gamen Echer Dindarer. Wimbashakower, Ahuera, Eli, Hui Nacher, Ahuelen, Igamen, Galefi Selin. The type of female you like is beautiful, powerful, mysterious, intelligent, and someone who is able to step over you, right?
Danitz's lips quivered as he felt as though flames were seemingly rising from his body and smoke was billowing from his head. At this moment, he felt his state of mind explode. It was as if someone had stripped him naked and tossed him into a busy street. Subconsciously, he looked around in panic, searching and avoiding the gazes that might be cast on him. Then, he saw that the bedroom door had opened at some point. German Sparrow stood there quietly in his white shirt, which hadn't been tucked in, and his rather loose black trousers. It was unknown how long he had been watching. Danitz stuttered, his face blank.
When did you come out?
He prayed inwardly.
Please tell me that you just opened the door.
Klein walked over to the radio receiver that had become paranormal and answered calmly.
From the beginning.
Klein chuckled inwardly.
As a seer, how could I not have sensed the strange activity outside? Even in my sleep, I'll still have my spiritual intuition.
Donitz's face instantly turned ashen. He turned his body in a half circle and rushed toward the radio transceiver that seemed to be possessed by an evil spirit, in a bid to rip up the illusory white paper with the 3 questions. But his hand went through the words without him grabbing onto anything. A scarlet-red fireball formed in his palm again, as he thought of blowing up the damn radio transceiver. At this moment, German Sparrow's cold gaze swept over him. Danitz froze, looking at German Sparrow step past him and stop in front of the unusual radio transceiver.
A Rhodes. How did it connect to this radio transceiver? It sensed a familiar but unique aura which is about to dissipate. Is it referring to the aura of the mysterious space above the gray fog? This radio transceiver was placed above the gray fog for a few days. Although it didn't show any abnormal signs, it still came into contact with the aura. And because of its own functions, it temporarily received information from the spirit world, and this was subsequently discovered by a Rhodes, the magic mirror, that seems to know a lot.
Klein suppressed the corners of his mouth and secretly took a deep breath.
Wait, what kind of question was that? I'm German Sparrow. I'm a cold, crazy adventurer. I'm a professional. I can't laugh out loud.
Danitz stole a sidewards glance, like a prisoner by the gallows, waiting for the noose to be released. Seeing no change in expression from German Sparrow, he was slightly relieved. He was glad that the person who had watched from the side was a madman and not a normal human being. He wouldn't have any interest in such matters. He looked with hatred and fear at the radio transceiver, at the demon who called itself a Rhodes.
If it were any other pirate, I would be too embarrassed to return to the Golden Dream. No, I would be too embarrassed to adventure out at sea.
He heard the clacking again and saw a new piece of white paper spit out from the radio transceiver. There were 2 neat lines in Loanese.
Your loyal and humble servant, Arodes, is honored to follow in your footsteps once again, constantly at your service.
Denitz's face twitched, and he suddenly felt that whatever happened tonight was surreal.
This isn't the same evil spirit as that Arodes from before, right?
Klein, who went through great difficulty to stifle his laughter, keenly caught on to a problem. Rhodes wasn't here in person, and had likely used the spirit world and the radio transceiver's special function to send messages remotely. Therefore, when Danitz refused to answer the first question, it was powerless to punish him and could only ask another question.
That's interesting. In the future, I'll just need to place the radio transceiver above the gray fog for prolonged periods of time, and I'll be able to make it turn into a unique item that receives spirit world information from ghosts. Unfortunately, by the law of conservation of beyonder characteristic, even with the augmentation of the gray fog's aura, its extraordinary abilities would dissipate, bit by bit, eventually returning to normal. Yes, to maintain an ordinary item's extraordinary traits without the use of beyonder characteristics, there's another method, according to my knowledge in mysticism, that is to carve the honorific name or true name of an angel, or even a deity in a language that can stir the powers of nature onto it. This would be equivalent to borrowing the target's mysticism and power. Of course, the premise is that they agree I can't do it myself. At least, the piece of paper that I previously used, as my bank's passcode in ancient Hermes, hasn't undergone any abnormal changes. For real deities, I only know the true name of one, Primordial Demoness Cheek. If I get her honorific name, together with her true name, what will happen when I engrave them in ancient Hermes onto the radio transceiver? Will it release viruses? Will it appear more aesthetically pleasing in an industrial sense, mesmerizing those with fetishes? Yeah, the outcome with the greatest possibility is that when carving the honorific name and true name, the powers of the primordial demoness will descend, sucking everything dry. This is an extremely precise, supernatural direction.
Strange thoughts flashed through Klein's mind until Rhodes greeted him.
Perfect. This is a magic mirror that can answer questions.
Klein's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head to the side and said to Danitz,
Go out and guard the door.
Without any hesitation, Danitz rushed to the door. He was afraid that the demon named Rhodes would ask him new questions.
All right.
When Danitz entered the corridor and closed the door behind him, Klein turned to the radio transceiver, which was connected to the magic mirror, Rhodes, and said in a low voice,
I have some questions.
White paper spat out of the radio transceiver amid clacking sounds.
This is my honor. Can I address you as Master, the great existence above the spirit world?
Klein pondered a little and said,
You're too obsequious and too shameless. Why do I have a nagging feeling that there's a problem? You can use any form to address me.
Rhodes used an exclamation mark.
Yes, Master. What's your question?
Klein asked directly.
Where can I find mermaids?
Amid clacking sounds, the radio transceiver answered.
To the east of the Gargus archipelago, sail the sea route for a week, and there's a chance of meeting mermaids. However, the mermaids there are all believers of the Evernight goddess.
Klein realized that his previous speculation had turned into reality in a way he didn't expect.
This is a little amazing. It's within expectations, but it's also surprising.
Rhodes continued to type.
If it bothers you, you can continue heading east, but it will be very dangerous. That place is no longer a real ocean, but the ruins of the War of the Gods. Of course, you definitely wouldn't mind that.
Klein didn't make comment as he watched Rhodes make the radio transceiver produce more words.
Who said that? I was still imagining that with the Sea God Scepter, I would have the chance of entering even the most treacherous of seas. Now, You are telling me it's a sea evolved from the battlefield of gods. Indeed, there was a war of the gods in ancient times. The time when the Creator reclaimed the ancient gods' authorities?
In addition, there are reared mermaids in the Church of Evernight's headquarters, in the Cathedral of Serenity, as well as the Sleep Cathedral on Dinos Island.
Klein was about to ask the second question when he saw a new sheet of white paper come out of the radio transceiver.
In addition to the Holy Cathedral, there are mermaids on Dinos Island as well? The former is too dangerous. They have grade 0 sealed artifacts and powerhouses at the level of angels. The latter can be considered. Transform into a nighthawk or a bishop and sneak in to listen to the singing and consume the potion. That's not right. The church rears mermaids to target faceless beyonders, so how can they not be on guard against this point? I have to think of another way.
Great Master, I must abide by certain rules. You must answer a question of mine in exchange.
Klein raised his eyebrows slightly and waited for Rhodes to ask the question. He decided to acknowledge this servant depending on the situation.
Answer your question.
Amidst the clacking, Rhodes used words to spell out a question.
What are you planning to have for breakfast today?
Klein calmly replied.
Nice question. Depends on what the inn offers.
A perfect answer.
Rhodes was almost short of giving a round of applause. Without waiting for Klein to speak, it continued to type.
The aura above the spirit world is about to disappear. I await the next opportunity to be at your service, Great Master.
After the illusory piece of paper was spat out, the radio transceiver stopped and lost its gloomy feel. Klein's mind raced as he noticed the hidden risks.
How many days would it take above the gray fog before I can contact Rhodes again? I'll ask it for the method to remove the mental corruption of a Beyonder characteristic the next time. Yes, this method should be used prudently. Rhodes can use the special connection after the radio transceiver is tainted by the aura. Those who are stronger and more terrifying than it might be capable of doing so as well. If I keep doing this, maybe one day I'll get a telegram from the true creator or the primordial demoness.
Chapter 557, Planting a Cue on Herself. East Chester County, the Hall family manor. Audrey sat at the dressing table and lit a candle. Afterwards, she looked at herself in the mirror, across from the slightly swaying light of the fire. Her green eyes gradually became deep, making it impossible for anyone who laid eyes on them to shift their eyes away, as if even their souls wished to drown in them. She said to herself softly,
Audrey, you have to remain lucid tonight in the dream.
This was a simple psychological cue. The ancient folk song she had heard at dusk had inspired her to explore her dreams and see if she could enter the sea of subconscious sea and the spiritual skies of all living things. This was an experiment that other psychiatrists had never attempted. At least there was no similar experiences in the reference materials provided by the psychology alchemists, giving oneself a psychological cue to explore their own dreams.
Perhaps I might be able to find traces of a mind dragon or even the City of Miracles, Liveside.
Audrey withdrew her gaze, removed Lie, which was now in the form of a ruby necklace, and placed it inside a jewelry box. She was afraid that the mystical item that amplified her emotions would affect her while in her dream and cause unnecessary harm. Therefore, she removed it in advance out of caution. After doing all of this, Audrey subconsciously looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw little blemishes on her face. While wearing Lie, she felt that her beauty was intoxicating.
Wake up, Audrey. That's only a lie.
She lifted her right palm and caressed her cheek. At that moment, she was very glad that she had chosen the name Lie for that mystical item. It kept her constantly alert. Otherwise, she feared the day that she would one day be completely dependent on it and not want to face her true self. The day she lost it, it would be very possible that she would lose control.
Those girls who are relatively ordinary looking might never wish to take it off again after wearing Lie to perfect their looks. They might be willing to die to keep it on them. For a Beyonder, I can't have such a state of mind either.
Audrey sighed and stood up. She walked briskly and expectantly through the warm room in her slippery silk robe, back to the soft, comfortable, and springy bed. and pulled a rope from the headboard. Her personal maidservant, Annie, entered and gently extinguished the lights. Before long, Audrey fell asleep. In the hazy world, she suddenly jolted to her senses and realized that she was dreaming. Méfier. She looked around with interest and silently said to herself,
Is this what's known as lucid dreams in psychology?
in mysticism, there is a similar concept.
It's really effective. I relied on a simple psychological cue that I planted in myself to get a lucid dream. Audrey, you really are a genius. No, this is mainly an application of a beyonder power. I mustn't be arrogant.
At this moment, Audrey had already figured out what the current dream was. She was walking along a dark, narrow road surrounded by a dark forest, and ahead of her was the castle with its spires. The prolonged howls of the wolves, the slow and frightening gasps, and the shrill and intermittent screams came from every direction, creating a dangerous and depressing atmosphere.
I haven't gotten over the fear of Duke Negan's assassination. I'm still afraid that one day, many Beyonders would suddenly attack my father, my mother, and my brothers.
Audrey dissected her dreams from the point of view of a psychiatrist. In this strangely real dream, she walked slowly toward the castle that was almost identical to the Hall family's ancestral house. As she walked, a figure suddenly jumped out of the dark forest. It was a gigantic dragon with golden scales all over its body. Its eyes were pale gold with vertical pupils, and its thick tail looked like it could sweep away everything. This dragon's facial features were exactly the same as Audrey's. When paired with its body, it gave off an indescribable feeling of strangeness and horror. Audrey jumped in fright, almost waking up from her dream. Fortunately, having been a spectator before, she was able to stabilize her emotions in time. This made her realize that she had never really forgotten how she had almost lost control back when she consumed the psychiatrist potion. Back then, her self-relief and the improvement in her mood was only superficial. The trauma had already taken root in the depths of her subconscious and would occasionally reflect itself in her dreams.
Fortunately, I discovered this today. In the future, I can try to treat this trauma in my subconscious. I'm a psychiatrist. If I continue to ignore this issue, I might lose control due to this fear when advancing to sequence 6.
Audrey examined herself carefully. As she walked and stopped, Audrey's dream kept changing in an erratic fashion. It would have been considered quite an unsatisfactory story. Finally, she arrived in front of the castle and saw an arm-length magic staff sweeping through the air, scattering down specks of light that were as resplendent as starlight. The castle that was shrouded in the light instantly became magnificent, and all the gloom disappeared. The melody of a band came out from inside the castle as one wall lamp after another lit up.
This was the most beautiful expectation that I had towards Beyonder powers at the very beginning. It really was a little girl's fantasy.
The corners of Audrey's mouth curled up, and her mood turned for the better. She didn't stop, but she walked past the castle to the edge of her dream. She didn't care how the scene behind her changed or how the story unfolded. After walking for an unknown amount of time, she passed through the barren wasteland and arrived at the top of a cliff. Looking out, the gray, blurry void extended into the distance. The area beneath her was so deep that it seemed to be bottomless. Audrey was keenly aware that this was the boundary of her dreams. Once she left, she had no idea what would happen.
And how do I leave? Jump down? Will I fall to my death?
Audrey thought awkwardly, not too courageous in taking the risk. After thinking for a few seconds, she slowly came up with an idea.
This is a dreamland that originates from the world of my mind. As the mistress of this place, I can use my will to open up a path for myself.
With the thought of making the attempt, she tried to conjure what she thought, just like the way she did it above the gray fog. The only difference was that the former needed the help of Mr. Fool, and now she had to rely on herself. Audrey stretched out her right hand, pointing it downwards into the depths of the gray fog. In front of her, the gray fog suddenly surged, revealing layers of stairs that led downwards. Without an end in sight, Audrey took a slow breath, lifted her skirt slightly, and stepped onto the first step. Step by step, she continued down the stairs. The surroundings grew increasingly quiet, so quiet that it was almost as if she heard auditory hallucinations. In this place there was nothing else apart from the gray fog. It was lonely and filled with the unknown. A howling gale blew in from different directions, causing Audrey to sway back and forth. The fear she felt slowly deepened. Méchants sais. Before she lost control of her emotions, her green eyes shone with a warm light that seemed to be able to see through the hearts of others. Audrey used her psychoanalysis powers to placate herself. She continued her search. After nearly a minute, a point of light suddenly lit up in the surrounding gray fog. Audrey took a cautious look, only to see that the point of light was of herself, back when she had just consumed a potion and almost became a dragon monster. While on the verge of losing control, emotions such as worry, horror, fear, and nervousness were clearly overflowing from her.
This is my subconscious, so this is my trauma.
Audrey vaguely understood where she was after she left her dreamland. She was in no hurry to resolve this trauma as she continued to walk down, step by step, filled with anticipation. According to the theories of the psychology alchemists, the subconscious was at the bottom of her destination, the sea of collective subconscious for all living creatures. During her exploration, Audrey once again saw herself listening to her parents, storytelling when she was young. She saw herself, someone who valued her image but wasn't actually very elegant deep down. She saw herself participating in the tarot club, only that all the specks of light regarding the latter were tightly wrapped in a gray fog.
These are things in my subconscious. They influence my character and behavior?
Audrey instinctively analyzed what she saw with her knowledge of psychology. Amidst the coruscating points of light, there were several times where she was pushed to the verge of an emotional breakdown due to the lonely, aimless exploration. But she had used her beyond her powers to placate herself in time. Just as she was about to lose all sense of the passage of time, she saw the last step. Mejukarak, as in front of the steps was a solid, blurry, gray ground. Above it there were streams of light and shadows. They were dense and overlapping, like an illusory sea.
The sea of collective subconscious.
Audrey took a few steps forward and raised her head to look up. To her surprise, the gray fog no longer blocked her vision as the clear, high skies appeared. There were countless indescribable silhouettes, 7 of which were of different colors. They were lustrous brilliances that seemed to possess immense knowledge. Audrey pursed her lips and happily said to herself,
The sky of spirituality.
Then she cautiously moved forward, forging the adventure that she could call her own. Those figures of light that formed the sea would flash past her from time to time. Some contained ancient memories of being burned by flames, while others bore the excruciating pain of seeing something indescribable. Apart from the imprints of the ancients from ancient times, Audrey also saw the gazes of admiration cast on her one after another, as well as the activities of the people who worshipped dragons. As she walked, she noticed a grayish-white mountain on the far left. It extended upwards until it emerged from the sea of light and shadows. The top of the mountain was shrouded in a dense fog, making the entire place seem hazy.
Is that someone else's consciousness? The sea is the subconscious, and beyond the surface of the sea is the ordinary consciousness. Yes, he's dreaming.
Audrey suddenly thought of a possible application of a psychiatrist. It was to move closer and climb up, directly affecting the other party's subconscious thoughts, allowing them to naturally act according to her bidding.
But it should be very difficult and very dangerous.
Audrey looked away, not daring to make the attempt. She clearly remembered that her purpose this time was to seek out traces of the Mind Dragon and the City of Miracles, Fleeced. Audrey passed by more than 100 other people's consciousness. Gradually, she felt exhausted.
It's time to return.
Instinctively, she raised her head and looked into the distance, rationally making the decision. She stood there for a long time, unwilling to leave. A shadow suddenly appeared in the air, just as Audrey was about to turn around. It was a pair of two huge gray wings. Under the wings, there was a long, lizard-like monster. Its entire body was covered with huge scales that were like grayish-white stone slabs. It had 4 thick and powerful legs, seemingly bathing in the sunlight that didn't exist as it flickered in what seemed like the afterglow of the setting sun. The monster flew over. Its eyes were pale gold, with its pupils vertical, looking cold and arrogant. Its grand and epic figure quickly disappeared into the sea of the subconscious of all living beings.
Dragon. A mind dragon.
Audrey jumped on the spot and looked around, afraid of others noticing her inelegant behavior. She paced around excitedly, feeling very satisfied with her adventure.
Indeed, the tradition of dragon worship here isn't without an origin. In their subconscious, there lives a mind dragon.
Audrey resisted the urge to praise herself and had decided to return immediately and wake up from the dream. She didn't have the urge to continue her exploration, as she wasn't prepared for it at all. She was going to consult Mr. Fool, Mr. Hanged Man, and the others at the Tarot Club next week in the hope of receiving some advice. Audrey returned the way she came, entering the mountain formed by her consciousness. Then she woke herself up and successfully escaped from the dream. At that moment, Danitz was also permitted to return to his room. He glanced at Gehrman Sparrow and said, with an embarrassed smile,
You won't tell anyone what you just saw, will you?
Chapter 558, Search for Abnormalities. Klein didn't answer with yes or no. Instead, he stopped walking towards his bedroom and flatly said,
That was a question.
Right, a question. That was a slanderous question with no basis. Besides, I also gave a negative answer.
Danitz responded with delight and had emphasized that he had never admitted to it. Klein gently nodded his head.
I will clarify this with your captain.
Clarify? Danitz stared. Then he half opened his mouth, his expression twisted. He was also considered a somewhat knowledgeable person, so he stopped explaining and arguing, and he forced a smile.
Is there anything I can do for you?
Klein took a deep breath and used his clown powers to control his facial expression.
Monitor it well.
Yes, all right.
Seeing Gehrman Sparrow turn around and walk to the bedroom's entrance, he couldn't help but ask,
You're not going to clarify this with Captain, right?
Klein twisted the handle and replied expressionlessly,
Monitor it well.
After he finished speaking, he pushed open the door and entered the room. Before he could widen his mouth into a laugh, he closed the door behind him. The next morning, after breakfast, Klein put on a pair of pantaloons, a thick brown jacket, and a cap. He changed his appearance and went out, leaving Danitz alone in the room to watch the radio transceiver. Along the way, Klein changed his appearance again, making himself look more like a native. He found a special store, bought a pair of linen gloves, a shroud, and a body bag. Then, according to the surroundings he had previously witnessed, he scanned the area around him for landmarks before finding the bridge and the girl who had died amid the mud in a corner. As it was still winter, the weather wasn't too hot, and there were no obvious signs of decay from the corpse, but the festering skin and the stench still made Klein instinctively nauseous. He didn't immediately come to bury the girl who wanted to live like a human being last night due to the recent events. Byam was under strict curfews at night, as well as the fact that the cemetery didn't open until dawn. Pulling out a small metal bottle, Klein poured some quelaag oil onto his hand and rubbed it at the tip of his nose. A choking sensation invaded his mind. The smell of peppermint mixed with disinfectant filled his olfactory senses, making him sober as if he had just fallen into a sea of floating ice. He was no longer affected by any other smells. Putting away the metal bottle, Klein put on his gloves, took a few steps forward, and crouched next to the female corpse. He unwrapped the shroud and began to gently move the corpse into the body bag. Carrying the bag over his shoulder, he deliberately walked through the most bustling streets of Byam until he reached the outskirts of the city. Along the narrow road where horse carriages couldn't pass, he scaled a mountain to its mountainside. There was a cemetery specially prepared by the Church of Storms and the Governor General's office for the natives. As for foreigners, such as businessmen, adventurers, people from Loan, Intis, and Fenapater, who had settled down here, they had their cemeteries situated on the opposite side of Byam, on a flat and soothing plain with forests backing them. Klein climbed higher and higher and entered the unnamed cemetery, where he found the gravekeeper dozing off. Foragei. The gravekeeper pointed at the body bag.
How do you want to bury him? If you want to do it for free, you have to wait a few days until the corpses in the morgue accumulate to a certain amount, then they'll be cremated together and buried in the same grave. Of course, there will be priests who will do a send-off for the souls of the dead in advance. 5 soli, and he will have an urn and a niche he can call his own. £2, he'll get an urn and a grave with a tombstone. If you don't want him cremated, you'll need a coffin. You can pick one over there. They're priced differently based on the type of wood.
Klein thought for a moment, then he took out 5 soli in notes and handed them over. The gravekeeper counted the notes, picked up a fountain pen, and asked with a good attitude,
What's his name?
He didn't actually know how to write words. He just wanted to draw symbols to help him remember. Klein paused for a second and said,
Bordy.
Bordy.
The gravekeeper repeated it in a low voice and drew a symbol. Without looking up, he continued,
She can have an epitaph on the niche.
Bordy was a typical female name in the Rorstead archipelago. Therefore, the gravekeeper no longer mistook her gender. Klein remained silent for a few seconds. Then he said in a low voice,
She is a human being.
She is a human being? What a strange epitaph. Do you have a picture? I know you don't.
The gravekeeper muttered. Before he could finish his words, he saw the other party hand over a photo. It was a portrait that Klein had drawn using a ritual. It perfectly reproduced the girl's looks before she fell ill. In order to not be suspected, he used the corresponding type of paper and some technique to make the portrait look like a real photograph. The gravekeeper was surprised, but didn't say anything. He quickly took the information and carried the body bag to the hut, where the priests resided with Klein. After the send-off and cremation, as well as the storing of ashes into an urn, the photograph was pasted on, and an epitaph was engraved, putting an end to the entire matter. Klein took a deep look before turning around to leave the cemetery. As he walked down the mountain path, he saw Byam in its entirety. The sea was pale blue, nearing the color of green. It was empty as far as the eye could see. Sails were stacked by the harbor, and the chimneys towered high. The streets were crisscrossed as people came and went. The surrounding estates were densely packed, and there was plenty of greenery. The distant public roads were wide, and the railways were straight. It was like a beautiful oil painting that was produced by a master. It was filled with vitality that was hardly describable. At the top of the clock tower of the Cathedral of Waves, the Church of Storms Cardinal, high-ranking deacon of the mandated punishers, John Cotman, stood at the edge, looking out over the refreshing sea and the mountain range that stretched out along the coastline. The pollution in Byam was rather low, as the mining and smelting industries were located in other cities on the island. The mainstay here was the spice trade, the brothels and casinos, and the accumulation and transit of goods. It lacked a fully formed industry, and there was a limited number of days needed for coal to be burned for heat. As soon as Sea King John Cotman retracted his gaze, he saw a mandated punisher running up the spiral staircase.
Your Eminence, there's new information.
The mandated punisher struck the left side of his chest with his right hand. The well-built John Cotman turned around and asked,
What is it?
The mandated punisher handed over the piece of paper in his hand.
News from within the resistance. They've received a response from Calvetua. They're in the process of creating new statues.
New statues?
John Cotman unfolded the note and skimmed through it. He then turned his head to the interior of Blue Mountain Island, which was covered in a sea of dense forests. After a moment of thought, he said,
Search for abnormalities in the archipelago's sea area.
He was certain of one thing from the intelligence, that the mysterious person who had taken away the characteristic left by Calvetua hadn't left the waters of the Rörsted archipelago. This could be determined from the fact that the person could disguise himself as Calvetua and reply to his followers. Meanwhile, John Cotman knew very well that the beyonder characteristic left behind by Calvetua, who had gone mad before its death, would lead to severe side effects regardless of whether or not it was reduced to a real item. Therefore, it would definitely result in an abnormality in the surrounding area. Moreover, he believed that it wouldn't be easy for the mysterious person to find a proper sealing method. Even if he had found it, there was no way he could control the effects when responding, hence exposing the problem. This was the clue.
Yes, Your Eminence. May the storm be with you.
The mandated punisher bowed again. After entering Bayham City, Klein dispelled his faceless power when no one was paying attention. He returned to the Wind of Azure Inn via carriage. As soon as he opened the door and entered, he saw Dannett sitting in front of the radio transceiver, his expression strange and grave. Klein asked in a low voice,
Got something?
No. My bounty has been raised to 5,500 pounds.
Dannett raised his right palm and shook the papers in his hand. This was almost reaching Steele Mavetti's bounty. Because of this, he didn't dare head out to drink or relax. All he could do was stay in the room and listen out for a signal. This rate of appreciation is really tempting. For a moment, Klein didn't know how to react, so he said without expression,
This is just the beginning. Mr. 10,000 pounds.
Dog shit.
Dannett cursed inwardly, but he didn't dare to show any disrespect on his face.
All of those things were done by Gehrman Sparrow. Why did it end up increasing my bounty? Those sons of bitches from the Church of Storms.
He forced a smile and shook his head, his facial muscles twitching slightly. Klein held back his laughter and ignored him. He went back to his bedroom to catch up on his sleep. At this moment, he saw a letter suddenly appear, floating down from mid-air and landing right in front of him. Klein raised his right hand and grabbed the letter.
The messenger didn't even show its face and just left after throwing the letter?
Klein clicked his tongue, opened the letter, and read it. There were two methods for obtaining a messenger. The first method is to think of an accurate description, hold a ritual, summon the corresponding spirit world creature, and make a contract with it. The second method is to directly enter the spirit world and search for a messenger that you wish to obtain. After obtaining its consent, sign a contract with it, and then record down the accurate description language for later use. The first method is relatively simple, but it is also rather dangerous, because what fits the description might be a powerful spirit world creature or a strange evil spirit. Every time you summon it, you cannot be completely sure what you will attract, and this is a risk that is hard to divine in advance. The danger of the second method is that it isn't easy to find the appropriate messenger, and there's a risk of getting lost in the spirit world. Unless you're a traveler. Otherwise, I do not suggest the second method. For the first method, I can provide you a description that has been tested and verified. As long as the process is done accurately, the level of danger will be rather low. But it might not satisfy you. Also, the contract needs to use powers in the undead domain. You can use my copper whistle to provide for that. The format includes the following paragraphs. Be mean. Of course, if you don't mind, I can transfer a messenger to you as a gift and have it sign a contract with you.
Transfer it to me as a gift? It's no wonder that the messenger didn't even dare show its face.
Klein thought in enlightenment. Considering that he had used the previous messenger as a shield and was unfortunately finished off by Mr. A, causing the later messengers to become increasingly rude to him, he inwardly declined the offer.
Use the first or second method. The first method is prone to error. I might even summon a candidate messenger and get beaten up. A commonly used description isn't unique enough, making the messenger's strength worrying. The second method? I'm not afraid of getting lost, since I'm able to instantly return above the gray fog. Furthermore, in my spirit body state, I can use the sea god scepter. The spirit world creatures aren't afraid of having their blood drained either. Yes, I have to do it outside the archipelago, otherwise I'll be affected by the prayers.
Klein quickly came to a decision. Chapter 559, Meeting on the Way. With that idea in mind, Klein immediately began making preparations. It was to explore the spirit world and select a suitable target to become a messenger. After he left the Rorstedt archipelago and its surrounding sea, he could bring the sea god scepter along with him to reason with the target and convince them to become his messenger.
Once I find myself lost or in a dangerous situation, I would immediately halt the summoning and return above the gray fog. There's basically no risk.
Klein thought for a few seconds. Then he locked the door and began the ritual of summoning himself. At the end of the ritual, he quickly arrived above the gray fog, but he was in no hurry to respond to himself. Instead, he sat down and let the sea god scepter fly out from the junk pile and land on his palm. He intended to scan the prayers of the believers as per routine for anything to respond to. During this process, Klein discovered that some of the prayers were actually quite interesting, because humans could deceive friends and relatives, but it was difficult to keep their truest thoughts when confessing or praying to the gods. At most, they would modify the truth to make them look less bad. A mixed blood, who had clearly changed his faith to the Lord of Storms, had already reached the middle ranks of the Bayam Police Department, but in his confession, he tried hard to portray his behavior as a plan of burdening himself to carry out a mission. For the sake of a brighter future for his kinsmen, he could only confess to God in misery, hoping that he would protect him, so that he could climb up the ranks in the police system as a believer of the Lord of Storms. Although his words sounded flawless, the fluctuations in his thoughts and emotions during his confession were clearly displayed in the prayer scene. It was something that couldn't be hidden.
Trying to deceive God while you are deceiving yourself. If it were a gigantic sea serpent like Calvetua who lacked intelligence, it might have believed you. Should I give him a lightning bolt or 10 wind blades? Yes, it's pretty impressive to have a mixed blood rise up to the ranks of senior inspector. I'll keep him. There are benefits to having a snitch.
Klein raised his sea god staff, making one of the blue gems glow. The light poured into the scene and imperceptibly seeped into the senior inspector named Bulaya. This wasn't a curse, nor was it a cue. It was a mark of divinity that almost no one could discover.
Simply put, it's a unilateral way for me to keep tabs on you.
Klein silently added inwardly. He continued browsing and saw a young believer with slightly curly bronze hair, praying for a man named Zangmo to be caught in a storm and buried at sea. He claimed that Zangmo wasn't pious enough, but the truth was that, as a competing fisherman, Zangmo was always able to harvest more fish than he did.
What kind of nonsense prayers are these? The human heart sure is hard to fathom.
Klein frowned and mumbled to himself. Then he had a vague idea.
For a faceless to engage in real acting, it not only requires a flawless performance in terms of external appearances and habitual actions, but it also needs to maintain the core personality. Not many changes are allowed. As for personality, every person is different, so there must be a difference to a certain degree. By browsing the prayers of my believers, it's equivalent to me realizing different kinds of personalities and mental states without going through the trouble. When talking about the many masks we wear, it's not only about looks. This will be rather important for my subsequent acting as a faceless. It can save me time from figuring things out through accumulated experiences.
Klein increasingly felt that acting as sea god was very beneficial towards him.
When you are acting the role of a demigod, even if you don't get any feedback, you will still definitely get some considerable benefits. This is a way of gaining experience of being someone of a higher level.
Klein perked up, no longer being perfunctory about skimming through the prayer scenes. After quickly browsing through one scene after another, his gaze stopped at a merchant named Ralph. The businessman praised the miracle of the reappearance of the sea god, and he had indicated that he planned to offer a third of his fortune, worth £20,000, to the resistance, half for military expenses and half for the reconstruction of God's statue.
Actually, there's no need to go through all that trouble. Just directly offer it to me.
Klein muttered half-jokingly. He thought for a moment, and then he conjured a background of waves and storms with heavy rain and lightning falling together. He responded in a low voice,
You have honored my name by helping your compatriots and companions. The young lambs need help, food, and education.
He intended to get Ralph to set up a charity fund with the 20,000 pounds and to seek donations widely from the community to make up for the damage, create a consensus, and help to provide local children with food, clothing, and education under the pretext of governance. As for the military expenditures of the resistance, Klein understood that in a world with beyonder powers, it was very difficult to rely solely on the opposition from the natives of the colony to succeed. Therefore, they needed the help of foreign countries like Fesak and Intis. Funding was undoubtedly needed.
Unfortunately, it's not possible to add a line in the Ten Commandments about boldly and confidently seek funding. That would damage the image of Sea God. The resistance shouldn't be thinking about annihilating the garrison troops. They should just focus on destroying the transportation infrastructure and make it more difficult for the Governor General's office to rule so as to initiate talks.
As a keyboard warrior, Klein wasn't lacking in ideas in such areas. He quickly restrained his wandering thoughts and made a divination to see if it was dangerous exploring the spirit world today. After obtaining the revelation that it wasn't considered dangerous, Klein took the Black Emperor card, naturally changed his image, and stepped into the door of summoning. After entering the real world, he stuffed the mystical items he needed into his body as a precaution. Then, like last time, he used cogitation to sense the spirit world. Taking a step forward, he passed through an invisible curtain as Klein's illusory figure floated up. Around him, red, yellow, blue, green, and other colors were superimposed, they were like the most abstract oil painting ever. The concept of direction that humans were used to could no longer be used here. If one used the old means of distinguishing direction and one's location, they would definitely find themselves lost. Klein roamed carefully and casually, sometimes seeing a yellow sun like a child's sketch, sometimes brushing past an incorporeal river that flowed quietly. There was also a flat woman with her upper body naked, and a face resembling a smiling moon, a canoe with its end upturned, a tangled ball of thread, and a serpentine staircase leading to the 7 pure lights. In this extremely chaotic world, other than spirit world creatures, all kinds of information existed as abstract symbols. Thus, what one received from a divination process would only be a revelation that required one to interpret it on their own. As for those symbols, there was a chance that they would come to life and become incorporeal monsters. This was the spirit world that couldn't be understood and viewed with common human knowledge. The last time he came in, he had easily discovered spirit world creatures, and he had noticed the creepy gazes from unknown locations that made his hair stand on end. There was the headless woman who carried 4 heads, a round eye with clear blacks and whites, and a giant jellyfish with a skull attached to each tentacle. He had easily encountered all of them back then, but this time, he failed to see a single spirit world creature, despite roaming for so long. Even the indescribable figures in the distance had disappeared, as if they had hidden themselves.
It can't be that you're afraid of being my messenger, can it? Yes, I entered the spirit world in the form of a soul body. Perhaps the thoughts in my mind will appear in a special formless manner here, turning into concealment symbols that interact with the spirit world. This then naturally affects my path options.
Klein was puzzled, but he couldn't find the reason. All sorts of thoughts flashed through his mind when his body suddenly sank down and he fell freely. Tay. After a while, Klein could only see the vivid superposition of the colors and the various symbols that took physical form.
What's going on?
He began to consider whether he should write to Mr. Azik and ask him about it, or to throw the radio transceiver above the gray fog and get it tainted with the aura, so that he could contact the magic mirror, Rhodes. While floating, Klein's heart suddenly palpitated as he quickly dodged to the side. A tinge of yellow and green flashed across his eyes as a giant foot that was large enough to squash his entire body landed, stepping into the interlaced red and blue color spots. Above the sole of the foot was a long, festering leg covered in a yellowish-green liquid. The leg was over 3 meters long, and above it was a huge body that was wrapped in corpse oil bandages. Amidst the solidified aura in the area, the two legs that were filled with yellow-green pus alternated as they rose up. Carrying a body that was difficult to discern, the legs quickly disappeared into the depths of the spirit world. Klein stood at a distance, not daring to make a sound. Finally, he confirmed that he was fine, as he grimaced and thought,
The spirit world is really scary. You can accidentally encounter a powerhouse just passing by. A powerhouse among the spirit world creatures?
Klein shook his head and continued his search. At that moment, he had no idea where in the spirit world he had wandered to. After drifting for a while, he finally found some traces of spirit world creatures. Just as he was about to switch from flying forward to descending to his left, he was surprised to find that his body continued to move forward uncontrollably at an accelerating speed. In front of him, the chaotic superimposed colors and the grayish-white mist that filled the area suddenly split open, and a large, purely black, three-masted sailboat leaped in. The boat was nearly 100 meters long, and 3 pitch-black sails were hanging high up like flags. On the left and right sides of the ship, there were cannon muzzles, and all kinds of sailors were running around on the deck. All of this was so real, so substantial, and so out of place when it came to the spirit world as a whole. However, as the ship entered the spirit world, its black color quickly turned richer, tainting itself with an ethereal vibe. On its deck stood a mottled stone chair that was 2 to 3 meters high, its back facing the cabin. Leaning against the chair's back, a colossal figure that was comparable to an ancient giant sat there. He had a black beard that went just past his neck, and he wore a tall, pointed crown on his head. He wore a gorgeous black robe with silver fringes. The wrinkles on his face looked hardened and filled with magnificence. It made one subconsciously wish to bow their heads. Under the slightly wrinkled forehead and on the high-nose bridge, Klein's pitch-black full-body armor and black crown were reflected into those 2 dark red eyes. As for Klein, he was having trouble stopping his slow flight toward the giant. Their gazes met among the layers of colors and symbols in the spirit world, and then Klein disappeared. The giant on the mottled stone chair didn't withdraw his gaze as he continued staring over in a long silence. Chapter 560. The Hanged Man Gets Fleeced. Above the fog, Klein took out the Black Emperor card that he had fused with his spirit body and instantly reverted to his original form. He mocked himself as he recalled what had just happened.
This is called a one-click gear swap.
He was almost certain that the giant wearing the sharp crown was King of the 5 Seas, Nast Solomon. The 100-meter-long sailboat that could sail through the spirit world was the ghost ship named Black Emperor, which was built by the ancient Solomon Empire.
I've always thought that a ghost ship simply means that it can sail on its own and wouldn't sink, making it closer to a strange creature. I never thought that the most powerful ghost ship would be able to turn itself incorporeal and wander through the spirit world. VC. That makes it almost a demigod, right? As expected of the most famous Black Emperor on the 5 Seas. Yes. I can't eliminate the possibility that it sacrificed a traveler during its creation process. For one of the most famous legendary treasures, the Spectre Empire, which carries the final inheritance of the Tronsoist Empire, could it be that the ship also comes equipped with this capability, making it impossible to find?
Klein's thoughts slowly drifted without immediately realizing the reason why he had suddenly met King of the 5 Seas, Nast. This was very obvious. The law of beyonder characteristics, convergence. Although the Black Emperor card didn't contain any beyonder characteristics, Roselle had added or carved something onto the card when he made it. It allowed the wielder to use the card of blasphemy after they advanced to a high-sequence beyonder, to subtly sense the beyonder ingredients that they needed. There was no doubt that such a sensation was mutual. As one sensed the other would naturally sense them too. As for the wielder, they would appear to approach a certain fate before they crossed that step into becoming a demigod. Swashat Allah. This was something Klein was deeply aware of. He ultimately suspected that the existence of the gray fog had brought together certain beyonders or supernatural events to him.
Traveling with the Black Emperor card in the spirit world makes it easier for such situations to occur. This is because the real world needs to abide by many rules. Even the fate from drawing lots needs to abide by logic, developing bit by bit. It doesn't make sense for me to use the Black Emperor card in Backland, and for the King of the Five Seas, Nast, to immediately appear in front of me with the ghost ship.
Klein thought as he wrapped the corner of the modeled table.
Even if he sensed the attraction force, he would have to go through the process of locating me, and through the process of traveling through the spirit world, take hours or even days to arrive. If he didn't sense it, he would only naturally think of sailing towards the Sonia Sea and head closer to the borders of the Loan Kingdom. In that case, it might take months before we bump into each other. By being in the spirit world, things are simple. There is no concept of distance or direction in there. Locations and distances are all extremely chaotic. Perhaps the King of the Five Seas, Nast, might have wished to go out on a spin in the spirit world, but he ended up seeing me pass by the moment he entered. This doesn't need to abide by any restrictions or limitations on geographical locations.
In addition to this, he was certain that the reason why he was thrown uncontrollably towards the Black Emperor and at King of the Five Seas Nast wasn't because of the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics. The effects of the law was only reflected in fate, perception, and desire, nothing too exaggerated. Otherwise, there wouldn't be high-sequence beyonders. All of them would be involuntarily drawn by the uniqueness of their respective pathway. Klein could sense that it was a type of beyonder power that twisted and strengthened his intent to move forward, resulting in him being unable to stop.
This is a very simple analysis. Even if I had thrown out the Black Emperor card at the time, I wouldn't have been able to stop. This is a lawyer, which is a beyonder power wielded by the Black Emperor pathway.
Klein leaned back in his chair and decided not to use the Black Emperor card anytime soon. This meant that he was unable to roam the spirit world in search of a messenger. If he hadn't brought the Black Emperor card and had used his main body with the Sea God Scepter, he would appear in the spirit world, which was filled with all kinds of revelations and information. He would inevitably leave many clues and could be divined about at any time. In terms of anti-divination and anti-prophecy, a Zix copper whistle couldn't be compared to the Black Emperor card.
If I were to really do that, I might meet 10 people who know that I obtained the Sea God Scepter when buying a beer at the bar. Of course, it was taken by Klein Moretti, so what has that got to do with me, Gehrman Sparrow?
Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating manner and decided to use the ritual method to get a messenger to respond. He could find something more suitable later on. After he covered the Black Emperor card, his figure disappeared from the mysterious space above the gray fog. Early morning, Byam. Algier prepared to take a carriage out of the city and take a detour to a private harbor behind the cliff. That was where his Blue Avenger was docked and waiting to set sail. As a disguised pirate captain, he couldn't dock so openly at the main port of the City of Generosity. That would be sufficient proof that he had close ties with the authorities. It was the same with the other pirates who had to consider their berth in advance before coming to Byam to sell their loot or gain enjoyment. They either went to a small port in the surrounding waters or to a private port controlled by someone with a deep background or by the resistance.
Finally, there are no more missions. I can go out to sea again. I need to first obtain a mystical item that can increase my strength and also square my accounts. After that, I'll head to the primitive island and hunt for the Blue Shadow Falcon, allowing me to advance to Sequence 6 as quickly as possible.
Algier was about to walk towards a rental carriage when he unexpectedly saw a familiar figure. The former pirate merchant, Ralph, walked out of the carriage with a ruddy face and looked towards the Governor General's office that wasn't far away. He seemed to be abnormally excited.
What happened to him?
After a moment of puzzlement, Algier took the initiative to go over and greet him. From his point of view, Ralph was, in a sense, also one of his comrades. They were all subordinates of Mr. Fool.
However, one is a core member, while the other just remains on the periphery.
Algier calmly confirmed their identities and positions. Algier asked after chatting about the weather.
What happened to deserve such joy?
Ralph laughed out loud and narrowed his eyes, saying,
If I were to say that I received the blessings of God, would you believe me?
I believe.
Alger answered in his mind without hesitation. Suppressing his curiosity, he asked,
What are you doing here?
Ralph was about to answer when his eyes suddenly lit up. He looked around, and after confirming that there was no one around him, he said in a deep voice,
Didn't you say that you also believe in God?
In order to befriend him, Alger had lied, saying that his faith lay with sea god, Kalvetua. In any case, this was common among pirates, so it wouldn't arouse suspicion. At sea, the weather was usually more frightening than any enemy, so most pirates, adventurers, ship crew, and sailors had great respect for gods who controlled similar fields, believing in them to a certain extent.
Of course.
This time, Alger's answer was firmer than ever. Machachai limelon ha komon stai. This was because he knew that the sea god that the other party believed in was the embodiment of Mr. Fool. Fursifras basialan malanachai. Ralph nodded in satisfaction, revealed a smile, and whispered,
I received a revelation yesterday. God sent me to help his young lambs. Macho, I intend to establish a charitable fund for this purpose. Aigalia faimeli, this is the will of God. As his believer, I think you would be happy to provide some assistance.
He held out his right hand and waited for the donation. Alger's expression stiffened, and he was momentarily unsure of how to respond. Although his present fortune was worth 3,245 pounds, he was preparing to buy a mystical item, making his overall financial situation somewhat tight. Of course, he could still donate quite a bit if he skimped and saved. If the sea god was still Kalvetua, Alger, who claimed to be a believer, wouldn't have hesitated to find an excuse. But now he had to seriously consider the deeper motives of Mr. Fool. Noticing Alger's reaction, Ralph's eyes darted schemingly before he said,
We want to help children who are suffering from unnecessary discrimination because of their bloodline. They live a hard life, and it is hard to see any hope for them. There are pure-blooded natives, as well as mixed bloods.
Alger was silent for a few seconds, then he pulled out a wad of cash.
Here's 100 pounds.
Ralph took it and said with a smile,
Your kindness will definitely be rewarded. Haas will protect you.
The door slanted over the entrance to the warehouse. Klein prepared the summoning ritual for the spirit world creature and was surrounded by the hallucinatory scent of herbs and essential oils. He was afraid that there would be some kind of accident if he held it in the inn, and although it might not be risky for him, it might end up harming the other occupants. Therefore, he went back to the abandoned warehouse where he had gave a sacrifice to Kalvetua. As for Danitz, having his bounty raised to 5,500 pounds, he was very proactive in asking to stay in the suite and monitor the radio transceiver. The procedure is to light the candle that symbolizes me, and to use a verified incantation to summon the appropriate spirit world creature as a messenger. Daly Simone's 3-line description and the various incantations provided by Mr. Azik went through Klein's mind. When summoning a spirit world creature, the first sentence needed descriptions such as wanders about the unfounded and roaming in the upper realm. Only by doing so could it accurately point to the spirit world. The suffix would clearly indicate that the spirit body was being summoned and that it was a creature that had a corporeal body. The second and third lines were an accurate description of the creature, but due to the restrictions of the format, one couldn't use too many words to pinpoint a creature. Therefore, it was difficult to predict or divine what would ultimately be summoned by the ritualist. In this sort of situation, using an incantation previously used by others implied a much lower risk. Then, after signing a contract, the description of the third sentence, the messenger that belongs to whomever or contract companion of whoever could be made, allowing the 3-line description to accurately summon the corresponding messenger.
Yes, my messenger has to run very fast. Otherwise, it might be killed by some malicious creature in the spirit world, resulting in the loss of important letters.
Klein's mind raced, and he came up with a clear plan, Mackermess. He took a step back and said in ancient Hermes,
I summon in my name. The spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the creature whose speed surpasses imagination.
Whoosh! There was the sound of wind, tainting the candles to a dark green and turning the surroundings cold and creepy. Klein saw a blurry figure rush out, too fast for him to see anything. After that, he couldn't find the fellow ever again.